This is My Favorite DJ, the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate everyone that is checking on these podcasts after we took a long break. If you haven't checked out the Patreon, please do so now. It's patreon.com/myfavoritedj. There's edits, tutorials. There's lots of downloads for all tiers. And I recently did DJ drops for a bunch of DJs, so check that out. Today on the show, I have a special guest, a friend of mine that I've known for maybe a decade. And I'm very interested to hear a lot of what has gone on in the last 10 years in your life. This is DJ Justin James. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Conflict.
Man, I have a lot of questions. I remember we went to LA for the Red Bull 3 style. I remember I went to Orlando for your birthday. And then you left the country. So, Justin, if people are unfamiliar with your DJ career, can you give us like a summary of what you used to do in the States? Because now you're in Southeast Asia, and you have been coming back and forth for a while. But what is, I guess, a history of your career?
I started playing in South Florida back in 2005 in the indie rock and electro clash scene. The Faint, The Killers, Lords of Acid, Fisher Spooner, stuff like that. And the year that I started DJing, I got my first out-of-town residency at a club in downtown Miami, which anyone from South Florida listening will probably remember, called the Pawn Shop. After working there for a while, I started picking up more work in various clubs from Miami to West Palm. And then I started working with a company called Extreme Trips, which at the time was one of the largest student travel companies in the US. After that, I started working with another company called Student City, who was affiliated with MTV, doing their spring break program for 2 years. Besides that, I was also doing weddings, bar mitzvahs, various corporate events, basically just whatever I could do with music in order to not have to have a real job. Then in 2008, I decided to finish my bachelor's degree and move to Central Florida to attend UCF. After I graduated in 2010, I decided to stay in Orlando and keep that as my base while I was traveling around the US from 2010 to 2015. And then in 2015, I moved to Asia. And since I've been gone, I've played various nightclubs and festivals around Southeast Asia, China, Europe, and Africa. And in 2018, I started releasing original music and have tracks currently on Dirty Dutch, Darklight, Brooklyn Fire, and a few other well-known labels.
Now we have kind of like an origin story for you. You've been in Asia now for a couple of years. And before we get to the story of how you got there, you have like notable residencies that you've been playing out there, like some world-renowned clubs, yeah?
Yeah, so the first residency I had was in Phuket, Thailand, at a really amazing club called Illusion, which is now number 16 in the world on DJ Mag's Top 100 Clubs list. And that was a really lucky gig for me because when I started working there, Illusion was in its first year and had really just started becoming well known. So every night I played, I was fortunate to do so in front of really big crowds from all over the world. After I started working at Illusion, I started getting offers to play all over Asia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Taiwan, places like that. And from that, I was able to start building a network of connections and friends in a lot of different places. Then in 2018, I got offered a monthly residency at one of the most famous clubs in China, a venue called 1/3 in Beijing, which is currently number 24 on the DJ Mag Top 100 Clubs list. That was a really awesome residency because besides playing in front of thousands of people every night, I was also in rotation with basically all of the biggest names in the DJ industry. And from that, I was also able to keep building my network. Besides that, to backtrack a bit, in 2017, I left Thailand and moved to South Vietnam to help open a venue as an entertainment director. That contract was only supposed to be for a few months, but I am still here.
You've been gone for like a decade, yeah?
June of this past year was 6 years.
Okay. I've kind of watched what you were doing over there. How did you end up in Asia? What was the impulse or what was the drive to get you out there?
Well, in late 2014, I went through a breakup and my ex moved to Las Vegas. And somehow I had convinced myself that I should also move to Las Vegas, which obviously looking back at is ridiculous. But that's the decision that I had made at that time.
But wait, did you decide to move after she did to Vegas, or was there the thought there before she said, "Oh, I'm moving to Vegas"?
We had both been discussing getting out of Florida really for quite some time and moving to a bigger and more lucrative market. And as you can remember at that time in 2014, 2015, there was this like massive DJ pilgrimage that was going on where seemingly a lot of guys were moving out there and doing well. So at that time, Vegas seemed like a logical option. At least that was the idea.
Right.
Yeah. So I had vacated my apartment, sold my car, and basically just consolidated my life as much as possible. Then I spent a few weeks crashing with a friend who had a studio working on music, social media, and some other stuff. And literally the night before I was buying a new car to drive across the country the following week, I got a last minute offer to play in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And basically, the promoter for the venue said that they needed an answer immediately, like within 24 hours. And I was really on the fence because I didn't want to go to Asia and end up spending the money that I had saved specifically for Vegas. But I had this overwhelming feeling that this would be one of those decisions I might really regret down the line if I didn't go. So yeah, I just said, fuck it. And less than 2 weeks later, I was on a plane.
Knowing you, I could totally see how you would make that decision to say, all right, just go with this. Like something presented itself, something, not that you like chaos, but I feel like you are a person that gravitates towards not the unknown, potentially experiences that you haven't had before. You would choose over something that you would know better. A lot of DJs might be on the fence about moving from one city to another, potentially for greater opportunities. Like you had this plan in your mind. It was like, all right, I'm going to Vegas. I'm going to try to, and I remember in 2014, 2015, Vegas had a lot of nightclubs. I think Hakkasan was not Hakkasan, the new one. Omnia was just opened around that time or was about to open. And there's a lot of clubs. There's a lot of money in Vegas and for DJs. There's the pool parties. There's the nightclubs. There's the off the strip stuff. There's the smaller venues. There's the lounges. There's a lot of stuff going on in Vegas. So I remember that time. There might be other DJs that listen to this that might be on the fence about it, about moving to another city to try to pursue something. When you make the decision to scrap Vegas, or not necessarily scrap Vegas, you just made the decision to go to Malaysia. You didn't think to yourself, or did you think to yourself, what happens next? Or did you just say, I'm going to Malaysia, that's it? Did you have a plan for your return? Did you think to yourself, all right, when I get back, I'll reassess and go to Vegas? Were you going to come back to Orlando? Or did you just basically one-way it?
The initial plan was only to go for 1 week. But since I had purchased my ticket with Air Miles, I could come back to the States essentially whenever. And I didn't have any financial responsibilities, basically. And nothing was set in stone in Vegas. So I had decided that it would be in my best interest if I tried to take advantage of my time. And after I got to Asia, I was well received. And I pretty quickly realized that I could stay longer if I worked hard and played well. And 1 week turned into 1 month, into 2 months, into 6 months, and now just over 6 years.
First of all, that sounds really cool. It sounds great that you basically diminished all of your possessions. You were completely, utterly free. So you have your clothes and a few personal belongings, and you decide to book it to Malaysia. Now, first, we're used to the structure here in the States, which is like headliner and opener, and the headliner gets paid more depending on the market. You know, a headliner can make sometimes, you know, there's obviously there's other ways of doing it where somebody plays all night. But for the most part, you usually have an opener and a headliner. Headliner will get paid more depending on the marketplace. You'll get paid, you know, $300, $400, $500. Some headliners make $1,000 in some markets. Is the structure the same in Southeast Asia? Do they have openers and headliners? And what's the pay rate in conversion to dollars? Like kind of, you know, ballpark figures.
That's a bit of a tricky question, actually. Asia is pretty big, as you know, with almost 50 countries and nearly 60% of the world's population. So there's a lot of countries and a lot of venues employing DJs with different policies in regards to guests, pay scale, etc. So there's not one uniform answer, but I know what you're asking. Major cities in almost all countries have at least 1 to 2, if not a few, high-end nightclubs that are implementing the opener-closer system, like in major cities in America. So, for instance, clubs in tier 1 cities like Bangkok, Hong Kong, Shanghai, etc., mostly all use openers. A majority of the time, multiple openers, in fact, and headlining DJs, of course. But some venues in tier 2 and tier 3 cities will sometimes just use one DJ. But again, it really all depends on the venue and what night of the week it is. And most importantly, how much revenue stands to be made. But keep in mind that most clubs in Asia employ dedicated resident DJs that usually only play at that specific venue or with that specific group. Kind of like what you were doing with the Opium Group back in the day.
Right.
Another thing to keep in mind is that most countries outside of the US also have music that is specific to that country, like Vina House in Vietnam or bounce music in Korea or, you know, songs with Mandarin lyrics in China, so on and so forth. And the resident DJs, these venues, know this music and the patrons inside and out. So I don't want to say that it's rare because that's not correct, because I've had a few, but it's usually a bit infrequent for DJs to get long-term resident spots with venues out here. Once a week, once a month, bi-monthly, stuff like that is possible, but the day in, day out resident work that most residents, quote unquote, do is not really for the foreigner DJ, at least not in most venues in Southeast Asia.
So I guess the amount of money that you're paid doesn't matter as much as the actual placement of it in the hierarchy of the culture. What was your living situation like? Were you staying in hotels? Were you crashing on couches? Was it a mixture of both? Like how, for those 6 months that you were there, how was your living situation?
Everything and anything. Luxury hotels, hostels, friends' couches, friends' floors. I even used couch surfing a few times, which I actually have some funny stories about. It really depended on how long I was planning on staying in that specific city or country, and most importantly, where my next booking was. Some places are much more expensive than others. For instance, 4-star hotels in Southeast Asia might run $50 a night, but a 2-star hotel in Japan might cost $150 per night. A nice hostel in Phuket might cost $30, while a nice hostel on an island in the Philippines might cost, $5. So it really just depends on where you are and at what time of the year you're traveling, i.e. high season or low season. My goal was just to keep traveling as long as possible. So in order to do that, I had to be flexible. You already know this, but I'm a pretty open and non-pretentious sort of person. Everything I do is about the experience. And the most important thing for me is to be connected with people and the places that I'm traveling. It would be easy for me just to come into town and casually see friends for dinner and drinks or whatever, and then fuck off. But I really prefer, if possible, to get up in people's personal space for a few days.
The best way to describe you is you're social with a gypsy soul. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, right? Like, you're a people person. You enjoy company. You would much rather hang out and stay on a buddy's couch than, at the 5-star hotel that's 2 miles from that person's house.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just how you've always been. So you have your first 6 months in Asia, and then you come back to the States. And then what happens when you come back after those 6 months? Do you say to yourself, well, I'm just going to go back to Asia? Or was there another serendipitous moment that got you back over there?
I had came back to the States in November of that year, 2015. And basically, as soon as I got back, I just wasn't feeling it. The first place I landed when I got back was in Chicago. And that night, I went into the city with some friends. And I just remembered seeing police everywhere and feeling kind of unsafe. Not specifically, of course, because of Chicago, but just being back in the States, which is something that honestly I had not felt the entire time I had been traveling. To make a long story short, I was back for a few weeks and I started seeing the same people, doing the same things, and I started feeling pretty depressed. And thereafter, I quickly realized that I needed to leave. Being back in the US, I just was not happy.
What do you think was causing the sadness? If you could potentially give a reason now, 5 years later.
Honestly, I think that I had just been feeling disconnected from the quintessential, American value system of materialism and consumerism. And I don't know. I just felt this really strong desire to not keep doing that. It just made sense for me to go when I went.
Is it possible? And I feel like you've always kind of felt like an outsider, even though, to tell you the truth, I mean, you were in the middle of the 1% of DJs in the whole country at one point. You were traveling to play gigs. You were there. So you're not so much an outsider to us. I think you might feel maybe a bit outsider-ish, but you're a normal dude. You're a fantastic person. But that being said, is it possible that the way that you could live in Asia, basically gypsy style, like I'm going to work for a gig and then I'll have money for the next month or two. I'm not going to touch these savings that I have, but I'm just going to keep working. It's acceptable and available there. But if you're doing that kind of stuff here, the culture will look at you like, oh, you don't own a house. Oh, you don't have a nice car. And so it becomes this situation where you have all these societal pressures here. And then on top of that, you're like, oh, no, I don't have a place. I just crash on couches now and then. I stay in hotels and I just play my gigs. People will look at you, oh, you're kind of a vagabond. When in reality, you're free. You have no debt to tie you down. You have no responsibilities on a regular basis, but they look down on you. Is it possible that the freedom that you felt in Asia, being able to live that kind of free lifestyle, is what attracted you and what you reject when you come back?
Yeah, maybe. First thing I would like to say is that that lifestyle is available for anyone that wants it, but it takes a certain level of comfortability living on the outskirts of what is considered as normal behavior by most. I've never really behaved normally, and I think that you and most people that actually know me can probably attest to that. I've always had a rebellious spirit, and I've always gravitated towards risky sort of behavior. So for me to make the decision to just pack up and go was not as difficult perhaps as it might be for a lot of others. I think most people are too afraid to walk down that path because there's no telling where it could possibly lead to. And I think that that is an incredibly scary prospect for a lot of people.
What I want to do is kind of connect the dots for somebody that might be listening to help them get over a hump that they might be going through, or to help them make a difficult decision if it presents itself in their life. So were there certain thoughts or feelings that you felt where you were like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't need this. I don't want that. I'm just going to find a different way. Because sometimes it's really hard to do those kind of things. Were there any specifics that you could think of that you felt where you were like, I'm going to be okay without these 37 shot glasses and my waffle maker?
After I made the decision to start getting rid of stuff, it all started to go pretty quickly. I remembered that I started with my DVD and CD collections, and then clothes and kitchen stuff. Before I knew it, I had either given away or sold almost everything. And that felt great because I knew it was real. I knew that I was getting closer to this decision that I had made to leave and conversely completely restart my life. And it all started with giving my stuff away.
And then you just kept giving away things as you felt. You're like, oh, I feel a lot lighter, less responsibility. So you just kept going with that?
I just started realizing that I had a lot of shit that I wasn't using and didn't really need. And in turn, that just was not bringing any sort of value to my life. So pretty quickly, I was able to let go of most of my stuff, minus my vintage t-shirt collection and my record collection, of course. And since I left, I would definitely say that I've converted to a pretty minimalistic sort of lifestyle. I have no problem spending money on people or experiences, but it's pretty rare that I buy stuff. And if I do, I usually spend a decent amount of time ruminating about whether or not I actually need that thing. Yeah, I try to keep my possessions pretty concise. Basically, all of my stuff can fit into 3 suitcases.
How do you think your life would have turned out over the last 6 years if you had said, I can't do this Malaysia gig because I'm moving to Vegas next week, so just keep me posted on something in the future?
That's a scary thing to think about. Probably not very good, to be honest. I know for certain that I would not be the person I am today, either as a musician or as a man. Because of this journey, I'm smarter, more well-informed, more caring, more empathetic, and probably most importantly, just more happy.
What are your future goals? What do you see yourself doing in I guess in the short term, midterm, or long term, whatever you want to discuss? And what are your plans for the future?
For now, I'm just chilling out a bit, working on music, and most importantly, working on my health, which is honestly something that I was definitely neglecting before, and I wasn't even fully aware of it. It's been really nice to have the ability to take a step back from the way I was living and start taking care of myself again and kind of reevaluate what's important. My day-to-day plans are the same for my future plans, and that's just to work hard and continue traveling and just enjoy my life.
Are you planning on staying in Asia? Are you coming back to the States to do work? Like, what's your plan?
The plan is to come back October through December and travel to and hopefully play in some markets that I've never been to, like Arkansas, Idaho, Montana, Maine, places like that. So yeah, if anyone listening would like to help make that happen and let me sleep on your couch, then drop me a message on my Facebook or Instagram at DJ Justin James, or my website, which is djjustinjames.com.
I will link you in the podcast description below. Thanks for your time, Justin. And everyone that's listening, please check out Justin James on the social media channels provided. And if you're not a patron, go to patreon.com/myfavoritedj. and we will actually, Justin, can I have some edits? Do you have any like cool edits that you've made over the last couple of weeks or anything that you want to provide to the Patreon for download?
Sure.
So thank you, Justin.
Thanks for having me.